And still good morning in the UK, and welcome to the first of two IoT sessions. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrew Parkin-White. I'm MEF's lead on IoT, and within our IoT program, we explore the key themes of global connectivity, security, and the identity of things. We also take deep dives into up-and-coming issues affecting the ecosystem, and two of those we're going to cover today, and we're going to be looking at eSIM and the impact of 5G on IoT. So we've got a very ambitious agenda for the next 45 to 50 minutes, so I won't delay any longer, and I will invite the panelists to join the eSIM session. And we're going to be discussing, is eSIM set to become a true game changer for IoT? So before we go any further, I'd like to introduce the panel to you. So can we start with David, please?
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm David Hambling. I'm here representing Pod Group Asia Pacific, and I'm based in Hong Kong.
Stefan, would you like to go next?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Stefan Sorrell, Chief of Research at Kaleido Intelligence. We're a research house mainly covering roaming and connectivity across the mobile landscape.
And Michel?
Hi, my name is Michel Zwijnenberg. I have a background in setting up and also selling successful IoT companies, and currently I'm an investor and in several countries in Europe in area of IoT and 5G.
Thank you. So I think we'll start with the very basics, and I'm going to ask the question, what is eSIM and why is it important? And I think, Michel, I'll direct the question towards you.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I mean, for me, eSIM is part of, actually, it's a virtualization of telecoms. And basically, it comes down to it solves problems for the IoT connectivity area in areas of, for instance, legality of permanent roaming, of quality of networks, because you might have backups, of easiness, which will all result in that GSMA type of connectivity has a potential to be used in an easier and also a much more type of devices way to be used. And
thank you.
So that I would say that's the goal of it.
Okay, David, would you like to come in there as well?
Oh, yes. Am I still muted? Sorry.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear. Okay, sorry, I had a bit of a computer issue there. Well, it's all about the kind of the seamless deployment and seamless provisioning and future-proofing the device. So you're taking away from what has always been just kind of puts the hardware in and you have to leave it in and you can't change it out for a very long period of time, to digitalizing it and making it available and accessible remotely and whenever the customer wants to.
Yeah, so quite a step change really in the market dynamics. Stefan, Kaleido has produced quite a lot of research recently into the market outlook for eSIM. So is it going to be a large market, and what do you see as the key drivers in that market?
Sure, thanks, Andrew. It is going to be a large market. I mean, eSIM has been around for a few years. It's moved quite slowly during that period. So, for example, in 2019, we saw roughly 99 million shipments of eSIM for M2M IoT use cases. COVID has also put a bit of a dampener on things. I think that reduced shipments down to 84 million last year. But what we're going to see is a significant uptick in growth over the coming years. So 2022, 2023, we'll see significant growth, and that will lead shipments to reach 377 million by 2025. So there's a significant jump there. What we'll also see is roughly 1.1 billion active eSIM profiles across the M2M and IoT landscape. And that is a huge jump up from 32.5 million back in 2019. So you can see that the shipment growth is there and the activation rate. So eSIMs actively being used is going to grow significantly. And the reasons behind that are what Michelle and David have already touched upon. I mean, really, the history of cellular M2M is that it was quite a complex environment. You had to deal with multiple contracts. There's the issue of roaming, and of course, device provisioning. If you needed to switch operators, you need to swap the physical SIM. eSIM can potentially overcome all of these. So it reduces, in the long term, the cost and complexity of managing large-scale IoT deployments. So you avoid things like downtime, for example, when your operator decides to bump up the price or decides to sunset, for example, a 2G network or a 3G network, and you want to keep your devices going.
Thank you, Stefan. Michelle, you mentioned that eSIM technology is opening up new opportunities in the aspect of virtualization. Do you see any new business models will start to emerge as a result of eSIM?
Yeah, I see plenty of them, because I'm actually also doing some consultancy in that area. But let me take one step back, actually just looking to virtualization on a higher level. And personally, I always like the comparison. If you would take it 20 years back and you would look to someone making music and say, okay, I have CDs now. You know, what if I can virtualize it all to MP3? What new business models would open up, right? And now looking back with hindsight, we know what happened, right? You have these streaming media platforms, but back then, if you would just have your CDs and you would make MP3s of it, nobody would really know yet what the new business models would become, right? And I think what we can learn from it is, I think there's always some disintermediation involved, or opportunities for disintermediation. There's other types of packaging, right? It's not one artist on one CD, but you can take all different artists, make your own playlist. And actually, when you go in that area, I think there's quite some parallels with eSIM. But also, if you look to virtualization and to telecoms, also eSIM is part of a bigger trend of virtualization. It's also happening a lot in the core network with companies, for instance, especially would say Microsoft, with some takeovers of, for instance, Affirm Networks, really moving into, say, virtual telecom space. Also, eSIM is part of that. And looking to what are now the new business models. If you would take it from an MNO perspective, right? Of course, there's a lot of new business models, but I think it's interesting to look from the MNO perspective. Then it's all down to helping customers to get a value out of eSIM. And when I talk to big customers who do global deployments, they always talk about things like, okay, managing a large queue of SIM cards, right? You can simplify that. How to get your connectivity much easier in your device. How to manage, like Stefan was saying, that the sunset of technologies like 2G or 3G. How with eSIM can I manage that? Or there's also more and more countries where there's like permanent roaming restrictions. And of course, there's also a cost element. If you do worldwide deployment, there's not one MNO that can give you affordable cost/quality in all countries around the world. You would, per definition, always need more MNOs. So if you look to that set and these needs are there and this value to the OEMs is really there, and if you can, as an MNO, create platform services to help in these areas, then I see there's a lot of value.
Thank you, Michelle.
That's where the business models are.
Thank you. I'd like to move over to David now, and we've sort of looked at what potential new business models are emerging, but sort of taking a step back at the moment, what do you see as the main applications and segments for eSIM as you're seeing in your business at present?
Well, following on from what Michelle is saying around the new business models that are having to be developed around the eSIM, it does have a good appeal to all sectors of IoT. If you're thinking about anything global, it's very difficult for one MNO to cover the entire globe, especially now that applications are becoming using more data per month per unit. So when you're looking at potentially gigabytes in many countries of the world, it's very difficult for one MNO to be able to cover that at an effective price. And with that, you start seeing quite an interesting development around the eSIM, where you have somebody like ourselves, an enterprise network operator, that can then aggregate many different profiles together. And from one RSP, we can allow customers to download the profiles in various different markets, and it makes it a lot easier for the customer. But also, as it has been touched on before as well, it makes it safer for long-term deployments. Commercial problems will come up, but with a profile, you have the ability to switch and swap as you go. So it's quite a good appeal to all sectors of IoT. If you take one example, you've got automotive, you have a car that is produced in one country and is going to be shipped potentially anywhere around the world. That needs to land in that country, download a new profile, and use a native profile or something that's cost effective there.
Thank you, David. So a bit of a broader question. Are we seeing different opportunities in different geographies of the world? Is eSIM taking off in particular markets, not so much in others? Maybe Michelle, you'd like to kick this off to give your perspective on that issue?
Yeah, I can have some experience, especially in the Europe and the US market. But luckily, we have David in here as well, because he knows much more about the Asian part. So in Europe, I really see it's really taking off. And how I see it, of course, that's my personal interpretation, is because Europe has a very wide market with a lot of MNOs. Like in the EU, there's like 50 plus MNOs. There's a lot of countries where there's legislation or very open network access from MVNOs or other type of players. And that has led to a very vibrant market with eSIM hubs, with eSIM disaggregators, or there's a lot of different models being experienced with, also by the MNOs, but also a lot of new players. And if I compare that to the US, I see this, of course, say it has about the same size. You could say it's not entirely true, but more or less the same size as Europe, but there's only 3 main operators. And that's leading to a whole different market dynamics, not only in eSIM, but so more in the whole wholesale openness of the mobile telco system. So there, I would say it's still, there's less new initiatives possible yet, because it's just another market dynamics.
Thanks. Well, I'll come to David now and ask you what's happening with eSIM in Asia Pacific.
I think it's actually quite similar to what we're seeing in Europe and the USA as well, that I think people are trying to run before they can walk slightly around deploying the eSIM, given that there's still a lot of misconceptions about it, about, just swapping between profiles very quickly, having 10 to 20 profiles available just to swap between at a given moment. There's still quite a few barriers there. And we come across this quite a lot in Asia. There's a lot of misconceptions, mainly around things like, do we call it the eSIM, the EUICC, the iSIM, all of these different things. And we get manufacturers coming to us, and they don't want the actual hard SIM card itself. They think it's completely virtual. Obviously, at the moment, majority of eSIM deployments are on a card or on an embedded chip. So we're seeing a lot of manufacturers coming to us at the moment. They're trying to find a way to get into the recurring revenue. They also want to ease the manufacturing process, reduce costs, taking the SIM slot out, for example, and that way, they can ship out around the world. And their customers can take ownership of this connectivity and download profiles as they go. So mainly over here, manufacturers are pushing it.
Stefan, is there anything you'd like to add to?
Yeah, it's more or less to mirror the points that Michelle and David have made. I mean, there are some strong use cases for eSIM across. I mean, automotive is a clear one. On logistics now, especially across the globe with vaccine distribution. I mean, that is a key driver to the things that eSIM provides, but also things like manufacturing, industrial use cases, and utilities. But in terms of where we're seeing the growth right now, I think Michelle is quite correct. The US market is a little more difficult right now, perhaps because the IoT MVNO side of things is less strong over there than it is perhaps over here in Europe, because of the market openness and willingness of the incumbent carriers to support that type of ecosystem. So for that reason, the US, in terms of volume of what we're seeing in active SIMs, is quite far behind what we're seeing in Europe and over in Asia. So purely from a volume perspective, I'd say that Asia is slightly ahead of Europe and is likely to be the fastest or the highest volume market moving forward. Obviously, China plays a big role in that. The main issue in Asia is the fact that China has quite a perhaps even more fragmented eSIM market than the rest of the world, because some of the operators, for example, have a domestic eSIM standard which doesn't comply with the GSMA's one. And meanwhile, the regulator has not fully settled on the GSMA's eSIM standard. So it's a little bit difficult right now, but we're expecting that to change. Purely from a growth perspective, I don't think we see any region growing slower than 70% volume growth on average between 2020 and 2025. So
thank you. So a question has come in before I move on to my next question. And the question is, how many countries are currently utilizing eSIM? And what is the strategy for countries that have not started with these? Any volunteers on taking that one?
Yeah, I can try to answer that one, because it's actually not so much from my perspective. It's not so, for most countries, it's not really a country perspective. Maybe different for China, because they really take a country specific approach. But if you look to Europe, but also to the US, of course, because of roaming, and also because both in Europe and US, there's multiple permanent roaming solutions possible. It's you don't need a SIM card from or a subscription from that in country. It can come from any operator as long as it has, say, permanent roaming agreements in the country where you want to use it. So there's no need for a specific country solution for low data. And I think David was saying, of course, when high data becomes important, or for instance, latency, then you really need to start looking to more like an in-country solution.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to ask David the next question, and we're getting to the stage where we need probably 30-second maximum answers. And it's really what steps are communication service providers taking? What should they take to optimize eSIM delivery? And is eSIM going to encourage new players into the IoT connectivity market?
Okay, so very quickly, I think to optimize eSIM delivery, we need accessibility, interoperability, and neutrality. So in the last one, a mix and match, best of breed approach. For accessibility, we need to be able to provide RSP platforms or dumbed down versions on IoT platforms, on connectivity platforms, so people can take control of the connectivity. And interoperability, we need to have more sharing of eSIM profiles across RSPs so that customers can mix and match, as it were. They can take profiles from many different operators. At the moment, it's still very splintered. And then neutrality is to be able to, for service providers to provide all of these then down to the customer, and that customers can take their own RSP or own platform and take what they want from different parts without contracting just to one person or to one entity.
Okay, and very finally, we're at our time now. But do you see that eSIM spells the end of IoT roaming?
Maybe I'll take this one. No, I don't think it will, not for some time yet. From purely a roaming perspective, we still forecast just over 1 billion IoT roaming devices in 2025. But the fact is that, you know, for some customers, roaming is still the cheaper option, because eSIM is not the cheapest method of connectivity right now. So that's one aspect. Also, there are things like multi-IMSI solutions out on the market, which is basically a non-standardized version of eSIM, which can lower costs and can provide decent coverage, but perhaps might also take advantage of sponsored roaming or something like that from the provider. And finally, as well, you know, eSIM localization is not always possible because of the availability of profiles. And even, for example, in Turkey, there's only just one remote SIM provisioning provider active on the market right now, so only just started. So on a global scale, to localize eSIM is not necessarily possible right now, which means roaming.
Yeah, I've one strong additional argument, if I can add. And that is, I've seen it also multiple times, say that you would need a deployment in, I don't know, 20, 30 countries, and you would localize 30 times. Then you would get 30 MNO integrations with each their own APIs for the provisioning, for the VPNs, IP numbering, etc., etc. And if you use one roaming solution, you only do one integration, and you would have also all the 30 countries, right? So I've worked with some players where the main problem is actually all the time these integrations you need to do again when you localize an eSIM.
Yeah,
Great.
exactly. These integrations cost a huge amount of money as well, and for small to mid-sized deployments, then roaming is always going to be necessary.
Yeah.
So nobody's going to have it. So at the moment, nobody has an RSP with all MNOs on the earth integrated into it, so anybody can just download the profile whenever they want. Roaming is going to be very necessary moving forward.
Right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for that very rapid tour through eSIM and its issues, challenges, etc. So I'd like to say thank you to David, to Stefan, to Michelle. We're going to take a brief pause now, and then I'll be back with 5G. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, so we're just getting ready to introduce the next couple of panelists. So I'm delighted to introduce Stuart from Zariat and Sylvia from the GSMA. I'll pause here and let them introduce themselves. So we'll do it in alphabetical order. So Sylvia, you can go first.
Hi, hello, welcome everybody. I'm Sylvia Kashish from GSMA Intelligence, the research and consulting arm of the GSMA. I've been in GSMA for over 8 years and I look after IoT, so IoT and enterprise. So happy to be here and share the thoughts on 5G IoT.
Thank you, Sylvia. And Stuart.
Yep, Stuart Mitchell, Chief Evangelist, Head of Product with Zariat. Zariat is an IoT solutions, connectivity solutions provider with a special emphasis on security, and we've got customers all over the world.
So the title of today's discussion is 5G. Is it just another G, or is it really going to offer substantial opportunities for IoT? So I think the first question I'm going to put to you is, what do we mean by 5G IoT? Does it have a particular title? Sylvia, do you want to start?
Sure. So 5G IoT is very different to 5G. So there are three main categories of flavors. If you want to think about it about 5G IoT, so you have the enhanced mobile broadband, so EMBB, that Release 15 brought about. You have the massive IoT, which is also known as massive machine time communication, and you have the critical communication piece that comes with the ultra low latency. And the 5G networks that we see currently deployed, they're using 4G, so the non-standalone networks. And what we currently see, so licensed FWA, as we like to call LTE Cat 1 and NB-IoT, they're already 5G compliant. So whatever is deployed right now as NB-IoT and LTE, in the future will become part of 5G. But what is really important is the consumer side really builds upon the enhanced mobile broadband, so higher, faster speeds. For the IoT, was really important is everything Release 16 and above, which brings in the latency, which brings in the network slicing, which brings in the edge compute capabilities, and also being able to cover a large large cells with one base station. So it's really very different when we talk about 5G IoT versus when you think about 5G for smartphones and so on. And obviously there's lots of different applications that can take advantage of that. So not when you think of enhanced broadband, that's AR, VR, and so on. When you think about everything related to latency, that's obviously manufacturing sector, and automotive, and so on.
Thank you. I'll move over to Stuart now and ask him, what role do you think 5G has to play in driving the IoT market? Sylvia's given us a very robust start, so I'll let you come in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great definition from Sylvia, and thank you for that. I mean, the thing about 5G in the IoT market is what we get for the first time ever. We've seen the separation of a consumer grade technology, which is, the 5G, way more bandwidth, lower latency, etc., versus the lower power technologies of LTE-M and NB-IoT. So what we're expecting to see, I think everyone would agree with this, is that proliferation of connected devices. We should see some more use cases coming about, but I think we're also going to see a proliferation of LoRaWAN and some of the other sort of competing technologies. So I think where cellular really comes into its own is around those remote or rural use cases, or where there's some need to look after moving assets.
Right. And I'm delighted to also welcome Stefan back to the discussion.
Hi, Andrew. Hello, everyone.
So you've not had the advantage of seeing the questions in advance for this session, but please do chip in when you like. So I'm going to move to a slightly questionable issue. And it's really, do we need 5G, and does it offer distinct advantages over previous generations? And I think I'll go to Stuart first of all, because I suspect he's slightly more cynical about 5G than other panelists.
I'm very cynical about the sort of consumer grade 5G and what that will do for the world of IoT. Without doubt, in our home lives and in our traveling live, we all want faster and better access to mobile data. So I have no doubt that 5G will be a huge success for smartphones, for connected consumer devices. But for as we talked about, there's IoT devices. Absolutely, 5G. The introduction of LTE-M, NB-IoT are going to bring massive benefits. Much better battery lives, more robust communications than we've seen previously with 2G and 3G. And really, like I said earlier, that split between a consumer grade service for consumers and a real IoT grade solution designed towards IoT devices, which is going to bring a lot of benefits, I think.
Thanks. Anybody like to add anything else to Stuart's comments to counter? Yeah,
well,
go ahead, Sylvia.
I actually agree with Stuart, because when you think about 2G, 3G networks, they were not built with IoT devices in mind. So majority of IoT devices currently using 2G networks, 3G networks, that are being switched off, right? So there's a need to migrate those devices that actually require very low bandwidth, so they're not higher throughput devices. So LTE, it's not LTE, Cat4 and above are not the best response to that. So when you think about 5G for IoT, you think about networks that are being built to actually make sure that those devices are best served, right? So, reduce number of signaling. When you think about all of the release 13 and above and NB-IoT, LTE-M, those devices have been built with the requirements of IoT, right? So you have less antennas and so on, longer battery life, because that's what's needed. So it's respond to the needs of the networks. And what we actually currently see, and this is very interesting trend, is we see as market is maturing, those more ruggedized devices are becoming more popular with both LTE, Cat1 and BS and so on. So what we see is, yes, there is a demand for 5G when it comes to making sure those networks are not being overpowered, but too much signaling and devices requiring not requiring actual the benefits of higher speed that's there.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Just to chip in as well, I think one of the main factors really for 5G is the fact that it's just re-architecturing the network itself rather than just new things on the radio interface. So what we're seeing is really significant 5G opportunities are things like the private network space, for example, so particularly in enterprises or in use cases which are rather remote and need specific requirements such as low latency and processing at the edge and so on. So this is where things like 5G can really come into its own, and that in itself is starting off right now. What we're seeing in the market is, first of all, demand for private LTE deployments, but that will soon transition to private 5G deployments. Yeah, I mean, across the wider market, when we talk to vendors, I think there is, like, for example, automotive OEMs, I think there is a little hesitation right now in terms of what are the real benefits for 5G. But I think we'll see that change over the coming years, particularly as module costs fall. So there are significant benefits as we move forward.
So we started to touch on the main applications and segments that will leverage 5G IoT. So I'll probably go to Sylvia next. And you touched on this earlier when you talked about some of the applications. But please do come back and talk about the main applications and segments you see that are highly applicable to 5G. And then Stuart, if you want to add something there as well.
Sure. So it very much depends on which flavor of 5G IoT you look at, right? So we actually run 2 surveys. We run an operator survey that looks, we survey 100 operators, and we do ask them, what do you lead with? So when we ask, at the beginning of last year, we asked operators, what's the primary 5G value proposition you market to enterprises? 30% of operators told us they do not market 5G IoT at the moment. And at the moment, they market the faster, higher speed, so which is not necessarily the best way to market to enterprises. And in 2022, that's when they're going to start marketing the virtual network running over public network, so SLA, security needs, and so on. And edge computing, it's something that they're also going to focus on, as well as supporting massive IoT. So this is from the operator side, and what they really see as key sectors for them to focus on when it comes to marketing the 5G capabilities and features is really retail, financial services, and so on. So it is very, very different. When you look at the enterprise side, so again, we survey enterprises. Last year, we ran a survey of almost 3,000 enterprises in 18 countries. Enterprises are aware of 5G features. At the moment, they see speed as number one. So obviously, they're not fully acknowledging that there's more to speed, but we also see the likes of manufacturing requiring actual network slicing and so on. And back to Stefan's point about private networks, what we see currently, it's 5G is not deployed. There's not one single way to deploy 5G. You can do it in shared spectrum, you can do it in licensed spectrum. There's also dedicated spectrum, so on. So there's lots of activity currently. We see 5G for verticals. We see all the movements in Germany with dedicated spectrum to enterprises. CBRS in the US, more countries looking into awarding spectrum to verticals. And the verticals that are most currently invested into that is definitely manufacturing. So GSMA has 5G IoT for Manufacturing Forum, where brings together the operators and the network vendors, the manufacturers, just trying to understand what are the needs and how they can serve, how 5G can best serve those needs. So manufacturing, obviously, you think about factory floor automation, you think about industrial robots, you think about, making sure that everything is secure, making sure there is a data isolation and so on. But you also bring in the edge element into it, right? So, there's lots of activities around edge, how this interplays within private networks. So manufacturing, for sure, this is a really big sector, but you also see demand for private 5G, private networks across ports, across healthcare. So it's utilities as well are looking to separate those network cities. So it is very much dependent into what is the need. And one of the key factors is to ensure that there's enough vertical expertise to explain the benefits that 5G can bring into it. That was a very long answer to your question, but we look at it from different perspectives. So what operators see as valuable versus what enterprises see valuable, and just trying to combine those two together, because obviously the language that those two speak is very, very different.
Yeah, I'll just ask Stuart a slightly different question, and thank you for that answer, Sylvia. Stuart, do you see it as a revolution for enterprises having 5G IoT, or more of a natural progression of things?
Sticking very closely to the NB-IoT and LTE-M angle, we're seeing a lot of interest, particularly from smaller, more nimble, more innovative companies, I should say. Really looking for multi-country access to NB-IoT in particular. There's a lot of interest, a lot of excitement around that, and really, I think the interest is way ahead of the deployment by the mobile operators. I think the mobile operators have got a real challenge ahead of themselves to think about how they're going to price this new technology. I think the days of usage-based pricing may probably have to end in order to get a truly competitive service. And also, as an MVNO, we're also struggling from the lack of roaming. There is, for 4G reasons, some relatively good roaming available for LTM, but NB-IoT roaming is really in its infancy. And there's a whole business model around roaming clearing settlement that has to be unpicked and put back together again to support that. So I'm not underestimating that it's difficult for the mobile operators, but it's something that definitely needs to have to be done. So, are we looking at a revolution? I hope so. But, we need the mobile operators to understand what's going on out there in industry and see what that demand is, and really bring us, like I say, that realistic pricing and roaming that we're looking for.
Okay, thank you for that, Stuart. I've had a couple of questions come in, probably more questions than we have time to deal with in this session. But we've had one observation that there was a chart put up in an earlier session showing new telco service launches, and there were very few IoT launches. The other types of content, finance, video messaging services was far more prominent. So the question is, do you think that operators are moving away from the service layer and just focusing on connectivity? Any volunteers for that one?
Stefan, you on mute.
I do apologize. Sorry, let me just chip in quickly. I mean, we ran a survey at the back end of last year across over 50 operators around the globe, just to really try and gauge the impact of what COVID was having on their networks and plans. And what we found was that over 50% of those operators are looking to shift their focus towards things like IoT roaming services and support for key verticals. So I would disagree with that absolutely, that there's no interest on operators for IoT services.
Yeah, no, I'd certainly back that up. That the mobile network operators, MVNOs, etc., have got big units that are focusing on a much broader set of issues. Stuart, did you want to add anything?
I was going to say, I think the mobile operators, very much interested in the revenues that are available and the potential for growth within IoT. But I think they do, historically, they've kind of struggled to really meet the market and what the market wants. Oftentimes, this kind of roaming-based approach brings a more of a mobile operator agnostic type attitude, which I think is always going to be difficult for some of the operators to compete against effectively. So I think a lot of the operators that we speak to anyway are looking to position themselves and understand how they can become part of that value chain, supporting the MVNO and the people like us, the ecosystem that we have together.
Yeah.
If I may add, so IoT plays quite hard for operators. We see them moving beyond connectivity, so that's beyond just connectivity services, IoT, cloud, edge, and so on and so on. But when we run our IoT enterprise survey, Enterprise in Focus, we see operators primary choice for enterprises actually goes down. And there are multiple reasons for that, because, you know, when you think about IoT, when you think about custom-made products for IoT, you think mostly of cloud vendors, the AWS, Azure, and so on, and you think about bespoke solutions, so making solutions tailored to your needs. So vertical expertise, acquiring vertical expertise is quite hard, right? So we've seen the likes of Verizon, Vodafone doing that and embedding that. But also, it's not only about verticals; it's also about bringing additional capabilities. So connectivity and security, connectivity and devices, and we see more and more operators actually doing that. So bundling connectivity with other services. Connectivity is still a lead-in because that's where they primary focus is on, and that's where the expertise lies. But professional services, system integration, all the other value add goes on top of that. So I would again disagree saying that they move away from the service layer. It is hard, it is very hard to address, but connectivity is at the backbone, and especially private networks and edge. We see a lot of partnerships in that space as well, be it with Ericsson's, the Nokias, and with also AWS and Azure, when it comes to the working together to come up with the best solutions. So 5G innovation, it is all about finding the best use cases and making sure that those two work together.
Thank you. I think we've got about a minute to 2 minutes left, and I've got more questions than we have time to answer. So I'm just going to ask a quick question that's come in that we may or may not be able to answer. Is network slicing in standalone 5G networks a mandatory requirement for application deployment from a vendor perspective? That's beyond my remit to answer that. I don't know if anyone's got any views.
Network slicing is fraught with issues of quality of service, of well, I mean, I don't even know where to start with network slicing. So, you know, as a technology, it's incredibly exciting. The reality, I think, is going to take a long time to be with us.
Thank you, Stuart. And I'll stay with you for this final question. What security challenges does 5G solve, and which new ones does it present?
Do you want me to pick that up? I mean,
yes, please. I think.
Yeah, I mean, we at Zariat, we specialise on providing the most secure SIM cards that we possibly can. We look a lot at signalling because of part of our DNA is around signaling security. True 5G runs on HTTP2, which is an enhancement. It's way more secure than what we've seen before in the past with SS7, diameter, GTP, and SIP protocols. However, a lot of those protocols are still very much in use. So, you know, we still think there's a role to play for ensuring that cellular connectivity is properly secured and protected. It's getting better. You know, a lot of these security angles are kind of identified and built in from day one, but a lot of the protocols are still being specified. So it's getting better.
Thank you, Stuart. Well, we've done a whistle-stop tour through 5G and IoT issues, and I'd like to thank Stuart, Sylvia, and Stefan, 3 S's, for taking part in the panel today. And yeah, I'm certainly interested to explore this debate in greater detail. And yeah, I think there's a lot of appetite for learning more about this subject. So thank you to you all. And yeah, I'll say goodbye from the IoT part of MEF for now. And I'll catch you later in a different guise. Bye for now.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.